Good morning, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion recorded on May 29th, 2022, recorded on 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a lot to talk about today, including a potential tropical cyclone threat shaping up for the Gulf or southwestern Atlantic basin over the next week to 10 days. We're going to analyze everything, so let's go ahead and jump straight into everything. Taking a look out across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, we notice that there's not too much ongoing across the basin as we currently speak. A couple of tropical waves down here in the intertropical convergence zone, but elsewise it is pretty quiet, which is to be expected for the end of May. We're also watching a flare-up of convection just near the southeastern tip of Cuba at this particular point, but interest will then turn into the Gulf and southwestern Atlantic as we progress throughout the next week to 10 days. So now switching to the Gulf of Mexico and southwestern Atlantic basin, we are watching an area of disturbance that is going to dive into the basin later this week. We notice that there is some ongoing convection out there across the Gulf of Mexico as we currently speak. This is not going to be the impetus for any sort of development, but we can definitely notice that there is some moisture that is stretching into the Gulf right now, a couple of flare-ups of convection. Nothing too substantial right now, but we are going to be watching this area later into the week for very unsettled weather. We also notice the area of low pressure that has moved into the Carolinas at this point, slowly now weakening, and this brought, of course, the showery, wet, cold, and just windy conditions out across the Carolinas and Georgia over the past several days. This is now moving well inland and is going to be dissipating as a cold front begins to slide south as well. So as we are talking about, there is the potential for some tropical cyclone formation or some type of area of low pressure to form in the southwestern Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico late this week into this upcoming weekend. Right now, there is a fairly low confidence level of this happening, indicated by the confidence level bar at the top left of your screen. Overall, there is signals for an area of low pressure to develop somewhere within this vicinity, kind of highlighted by the red areas there. But where will this low pressure be? Where is it going to head? Where is it going to impact? When and how bad the impacts will be remains the biggest question. And a lot of those questions we do simply not have answers to at this moment in time. So what we're looking at here is the GFS 850 millibar vorticity, or the spin in the atmosphere at roughly about 5,000 feet off the ground, overlaid here with the 10-meter winds, which is indicated by all these little arrows, which is the wind just above the surface at about 10 meters off of ground level. So we'll go ahead and run this forward. This is beginning on June 1st at 8 p.m. So now we're into June 2nd. We notice that there's an area of spin just off the Florida East Coast, roughly stretching from about Tampa to Miami and into the Bahamas. There's an elongated area of spin in the atmosphere, and you can kind of just see that if we back this up. This actually originates over the Gulf of Mexico and kind of dives into Florida and the Bahamas at this particular point. And we continue to run this forward. We notice that we start to get a tightening of the wind field here at about 10 meters off the ground, indicating there is an established low pressure system trying to form in the Bahamas and just off the Florida East Coast roughly by June 2nd or June 3rd. And then we continue to move this forward. This is later on the day on June 3rd. This system moves out in and just off the southeast United States coast, and very similar to what happened just a few days ago with low pressure development. We've got higher pressure, relatively higher pressure to the north and relatively lower pressure to the south, and we get a tightening of the pressure gradient along the coast, and this indicates that we have some pretty strong winds over about 20 to 30 miles per hour just off of the Carolina coastline. This area of low pressure continues to consolidate and eventually does end up trying to become some sort of established low pressure, whether this be a tropical storm, depression, or just an unorganized non-tropical low. It does seem that on late in the day, June 4th, we have winds in excess of about 40 miles per hour just off the Carolina coastline and just off the Florida East Coast, with about 40 to 45 miles per hour of wind just off the coast here, with an area of low pressure sitting just offshore. If this were to verify, this would bring some heavier winds and really just some heavier rain to the entirety of the Florida East Coast, potentially the Carolinas as well. But it remains to be seen what is exactly going to happen. So now what we're looking at here is again the 850 millibar vorticity overlaid with the 300 millibar winds. So this is roughly up at about 20 to 25,000 feet above the ground. So this is again starting off in the early part of June 2nd, and we'll go ahead and run this forward. And we notice the area of low pressure trying to tighten off the southeast United States coast on June 3rd. However, we notice that there is going to be some upper level winds that are going to be cutting across this system. And if we continue to move this forward, we notice how these upper level winds will be cutting across. They're not particularly strong in this instance, so shear values probably 15 to 20 knots. Not the most conducive for tropical cyclone activity. And we notice here on the morning of June 5th, those upper level winds become more established closer to the circulation itself. So again, there is going to be a little bit of shear, but we notice that there is a response in the mid and upper levels to this area of low pressure. And so if this can generate its own outflow and not necessarily not care about the 15 to 20 knots of shear, but at least coexist in that same environment, it is theoretically possible you could get a low to mid-range tropical cyclone, tropical storm, depression, something like that in the southwestern Atlantic basin within the next 7 to 10 days. Again, the Hurricane Center has not mentioned this yet, and the models are all over the place. And this is just one forecast model, so don't take what this says verbatim. But this does at least give an indication, along with some of the recent European runs, that there could be some type of tropical mischief to watch out for. So finally here we're looking at the GFS precipitable water forecast. This again beginning on the morning of June 2nd. So this is going to be monitoring how much water content is in the atmosphere at this particular point. And all of the warmer colors indicate the potential for higher moisture to be in the atmosphere at any given particular time. So we'll move this forward, and we notice that the system tries to cut off from what appears to be apparent some type of upper level support or front. This is on the morning of June 3rd. We go ahead and continue this forward, and we notice that this begins to kind of cut off and wrap around itself. Now, this to me still looks like that this is connected to some type of front in here, but again, this could be very well some type of hybrid tropical or subtropical cyclone in the southwestern Atlantic on the June 4th morning here. And we can even see here that there is these warmer colors here, these darker reds and pinks. So this indicates that there's higher moisture lurking off the Florida East Coast. And notice how that gets fairly close to the Florida coastline here on the morning of June 5th. And there's a tropical cyclone or some type of area of low pressure sitting right here. So again, while the details are murky on this, and again, the specific details are just not going to be found at this time range, there is certainly some idea that there might be some type of tropical mischief in the southwestern Atlantic or the eastern and northeastern Gulf of Mexico within the next 7 to 10 days. So residents are advised, and any travelers are advised, to just keep checking back on the forecasts. Again, nothing is set in stone at this time, and this forecast will change a lot between now and the next 7 to 10 days. So I do advise everyone to check back at a later point, and we will certainly do the same. Turning our attention to the Eastern Pacific Basin, there is still not much occurring at this given time. Again, we have convection ongoing across the intertropical convergence zone with several tropical waves out there. Nothing of any substantial development expected over the next several days, as strong upper level winds and the proximity to dry air will certainly be a problem. So the tropical Pacific is nice and quiet at this time. No impacts expected to any of the coastal areas over the next week. So with that being said, I do hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael O'Malley, and I'll be talking to you guys again over the next several days.